Well, originally I was kind of disappointed when the whole conflict, when the invasion happened and the first set of sanctions came out. But since then, the sanctions have been ratcheted up to such an extent that I think that they're even more powerful than my most optimistic projections. I think these sanctions are truly strangling Vladimir Putin in a lot of different ways. I think there's still more that can be done, but for the most part, I would give this I would rate the governments very highly at this stage for the sanctions.
Okay, could you be a little bit more specific? What do you think is missing so far? You would want even more. So what?
Well, let me talk about what's good, and let me talk about what's still missing. So what's good is the Central Bank of Russia has been sanctioned, and so all of the reserves in hard currency and in euros, dollars, sterling have all been frozen, which is extremely good. Russia has been cut off. 70% of the banks have been cut off from the international SWIFT payment system, which is very strong and good. About 24 oligarchs have had their assets frozen, which is very good. And many Western companies have disinvested and stopped doing business in Russia, which is very good. That's the good part. What more could be done? There's no reason why 70% of the banks have been cut off from SWIFT and not 100%. That needs to be done. 24 oligarchs have been sanctioned. We need 100 oligarchs sanctioned. That still needs to be done. And there's still a minority of Western companies that are doing business in Russia who have still to disinvest, and that needs to be done. But we're getting towards a place which I think is very strong. It's going to cause Vladimir Putin to think very carefully about how he's going to make it through this mess that he's created, because he's going to run out of money. It's plain and simple.
Yeah, exactly. So is that your major argument towards sanctioning so massively? It hits innocent Russians. So what is your perspective on that?
Ideally, we would have never been in a situation where we had to sanction the Russian population. But the problem is that Vladimir Putin got the sense from the West that there was not going to be any consequences to invading Ukraine. And it was a reasonable assumption by him, because he's been doing terrible things for the last 2 decades and there haven't been any consequences. He thought the same thing was going to happen here. Had we just sanctioned oligarchs and not the general public before the invasion, he might have taken it seriously enough to alter his plans. But now we're in a situation where Russia has invaded Ukraine. They're murdering people on a daily basis in large numbers. There's a massacre going on in Kharkiv and Mariupol. They're sending rockets into all sorts of places in Kiev. And we have to do everything we can possibly do in the West to stop this war. And the only way, in my estimation, to stop this war is to basically starve Putin of any financial resources to carry it on. And that seems to be the strategy that will work. And unfortunately, the Russian people are going to be caught in the crossfire, and there's no way around it.
Okay, and you have yourself been struggling a lot. You have been advocating sanctions towards Russian under a long time. And can you very briefly describe what reaction you historically have gotten from the West?
So my whole story is about the murder of Sergei Magnitsky. He was a Russian lawyer who worked for me. He was arrested, tortured, and killed for uncovering a government corruption scheme. And that happened in 2009. And since then, I've been on a mission to get justice. And the mission has led me to advocate for a law called the Magnitsky Act, which would freeze the assets and ban the visas of human rights violators. I started this campaign in the United States, and it led to the passage of the US Magnitsky Act in 2012. We then did it in Canada, in the UK, in the EU, in Australia, in Norway, in Montenegro and Kosovo. And so there's now 34 countries with the Magnitsky Act. And this is the main tool. This is the template which is now being used to sanction the oligarchs. Vladimir Putin has taken very badly to this because he understands the power that this has over his money and the money of the oligarchs. He's made it a big mission to try to stop this from happening. He didn't succeed. He's also made it a big mission to go after me personally. He's threatened me with death, with kidnapping. I've been on the receiving end of 8 Interpol arrest warrants. They've sued me. They've tried to have me extradited. They make movies about me. They write books about me, all sorts of stuff. to try to stop me in this mission for justice. And so I've seen in my own small way what an evil, terrible, and criminal man Vladimir Putin is. I've tried to convince the West that this is true. Most people didn't want to hear it, and now here we are.
Yeah, and can you be a little bit more specific about the reaction from Sweden? You have been coming to Sweden in the past, and you have trying to get the Magnitsky Act here. What could you say about the Swedish reaction?
It was shameful. I've had numerous meetings with people in the Swedish foreign ministry over a long period of time, trying to argue that Sweden should have a Magnitsky Act to freeze the assets and ban the visas of Russian human rights violators and kleptocrats. And I was given an extremely, I would describe it as a rude reception. I was treated as if I was some type of fanatic coming in and talking about such a thing, that it was just, idiotic and inflammatory to try to create some kind of consequences for Vladimir Putin. And, this is the attitude which has led to where we are today.
Great. And my last question, how do you think this war will end?
Well, I think that the most likely scenario is that it won't end, that this will carry on for years and years and years. It will be a frozen conflict. You might have ceasefires, you might have even peace treaties, but Vladimir Putin is a man who doesn't honor any ceasefire or a treaty. And there'll be killings of Ukrainians, there'll be killings of Russian soldiers, and there'll be atrocities, and this will go on and on and on. That's the most likely scenario. The real downside scenario for us is that Vladimir Putin wins in Ukraine, and then he lines up on the Estonian border and points his guns towards Estonia and tests whether Article 5 of NATO, the Mutual Defense Agreement, holds. And he's hoping that Americans and others won't want to go to war with Russia over Estonia. That's the nightmare scenario. And there is one very low probability positive scenario, which is one which is not entirely impossible, which is that somehow the Ukrainians, even though they've been outmanned and outgunned, destroy the Russian military in Ukraine. And there are sort of anecdotal signs of this. You see these columns of tanks which have been destroyed. You see 4 generals have now been killed. And there's a possibility that Russia runs out of gas, literally, and gets stuck in Ukraine, and the soldiers flee. And if that were to happen, if Ukraine were to win this war, Vladimir Putin probably doesn't have much of a future in Russia.